Welcome. You are either listening or watching Think Resolutions podcast with Howard Kline. Today, we're going to be talking about, for lack of a better description, how mediators might be becoming looser, as my special guest, Patty or Pat. Patty, how do I pronounce your last name? I always get
Pat Battie.
Battie. Pat Battie. I might do some editing.
Yes.
Or maybe I'll just leave it in so that people know
Yeah.
I'm not exactly perfect. And Pat approached me on that topic, and I paraphrased it a bit for marketing purposes, asking if mediators are not really following the rules that they were trained with. Now, that was my guess as to what Pat intended. So she's going to get into talking about that. But before we do, let me tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm doing these podcasts. I'm a mediator and an arbitrator. My name is Howard Kline, and I've been a California licensed attorney since 1976, which is a long time. And although I do my podcasts for the purpose of educating, informing, entertaining, hopefully, and paying it forward. In this video, I'm not going to go into the difference between the two, but suffices to say that in mediations, there's lots of studies indicating that if you mediate early, it's really cost savings and for your benefit. So now, without further ado, let me ask you this question, Pat. What did you mean by mediators are looser?
Thank you so much, Howard. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's important to me, just an aside before I answer that question, that when I deliver a training, mediation or otherwise, it is my goal to make it as interesting and interactive and participatory and fun. And you know what? Because we have all, as professionals, sat through a grueling, what has been named as a training, but ended up just being a presentation that we were just couldn't hardly wait for it to be over with, just to put us out of our misery. So I never in my profession want to be one of those people.
You were not. You were not. You had these, for lack of, you had these puzzles that had us guessing, trying to figure out what it was. And it was very challenging. And everybody in the class participated. It was really a great class. And I'm still in touch with a lot of the people from the class.
Awesome.
I thought you were great.
Thank you
and I've
so much.
taken lots of other trainings too. And they're a little bit different.
Sure.
But if you're going to be sitting in a warm room on Saturdays, I can't imagine. All day. I can't imagine doing it any better than you did.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay, so let's get to the topic.
So get to the topic. What I meant when we were having our conversation, and I've been a trainer of mediation for over 17 years, and so I have a lot of experiences. I have trained every variety of people from housewives to politicians, so a lot and everything in between. So in my experience as a trainer and as a mediator for as long, what I have noticed, and I want to thank you for reframing that from looser to maybe just not following the rules.
As trained.
Yes, as
because
trained.
there are different types of mediation.
Absolutely. And so we train the facilitative model at the Neighborhood Justice Center. We'll get into what that is later on in the podcast.
Excuse me.
However, mediation, there's a process, right? And I use the term practice drives your purpose. And so if you know what your purpose drives the practice. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. Your purpose drives your practice. So if you know what the purpose is, when you are delivering or helping folks in a mediation, your practice should follow that. So, for instance, we train a 40-hour training, and it's very purposeful. Everything that we share in that training is very purposeful. We try to leave not one stone unturned, as you may have, as you may can relate to. And I believe when folks do not have a buy-in to that purpose, that they take it and make it what they want it to be. And that may work. However, it can be a little loose at that point. So that's what I meant. And that was my intent when I said a little loose. So if I am a surgeon and I've been trained to follow a certain process in order to have the best outcome, I probably should take that and heed that to those processes. So that means that I can still do the surgery, but it may not have the best outcome. So that's what I meant when you get a little loose, that could be the danger of not following a process well.
So without giving me names, could you give me some examples of where you're seeing that looseness? And I'm assuming that some of it might be where you work and some of it may be outside of your work. And
Yes.
it's not beneficial to say where it is, but some of your observances and where you're getting some concern.
And it's a variety of those. And I understand when people are newly trained and they're getting their sea legs under them, and you have to do the job in order to get better at the job, right?
Absolutely.
Some examples would be just a high level example. We train regarding our guidelines because folks are putting their name that this is how we will behave. These are the expectations of the service that we're about to embark upon. Reading the guidelines, READ, the guidelines, not hand them to someone to read themselves, taking it for granted that a person knows how to read, that could be a misstep. And I trained this. If I hand you a piece of paper and says, and I say, okay, read over this and let me know if you have any questions and sign your name to it. If you're illiterate, you're not going to tell me, I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't know how to read. You're going to look at that paper and go, it looks good. Yes, ma'am. Without even knowing what you read. And so to me, it's important to not skip those type of steps because I rather err on the side of excellence to the client as opposed to making assumptions. So that's like a high level view.
Can you give me
for the
another
process.
example?
Let's see. Another example would be not caucusing.
Well, a
I know
caucus isn't always necessary.
it's not always necessary. However, if folks start the process and they are at odds, they're in front of you because they are at odds. They cannot agree. So if I've seen folks go into a mediation very early on, folks are at each other and they just say, it looks like you're not going to come to a resolution. Thank you for your time. So that is a misstep. The caucus is designed for people to, let me pull back from that. So process. We expect people to be high emotional when they come into a mediation. They're going to be at each other. They're ready to tell their story, let somebody know how wrong they were done, or the whole nine. So you should expect people to be high emotional at the beginning of a mediation. So with that expectation, if I'm following the process, I know that they're going to come in high, have their say, and the caucus can help them even out a little bit and then hopefully get to resolve. But if I'm stopping you at the process at a high emotional level, which I should expect as a professional mediator, and not allow you to take that way, I'm not serving you well. Again, a surgeon, you can do the surgery, but you hopefully want to have the best outcome for the parties.
Now, my experience with you is when it comes to facilitative mediation, and as I've been trained, you are by the book. You are by the book. And I don't mean that in a negative fashion, because when I get to co-mediate with you, I'm constantly learning and reiterating what my training was, and it allows me to refocus on what I think I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me step back a second. When I went through training with you had some reservations about me, did you not?
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt, whenever like I said, housewives to politicians and attorneys, I love to have in my class. And I appreciate you all because you do have to switch hats. And
Yes.
sometimes it's a hard shift to go from advocate to neutral. And so I get that. That doubt wasn't personal. It's just what my experience is.
I had that down. I expressed it to
Right.
you. How if I can wear these two hats?
Yes. And so that comes from my experience with working with attorneys. But again, in my experience, some of the best mediators are attorneys. And I just love to see you all be able to make that shift, knowing that most of you all are bulldogs. You're there to win. And I appreciate that.
My focus in mediations is slightly different if I get an ad hoc mediation and there are attorneys involved
Sure.
versus mediation at the Clark County Neighborhood Justice Center, where I'm dedicated to follow the rules as closely as I can. And my focus when I'm doing a facilitative mediation, as I've been trained, is not on getting the parties to settle. I know that's the goal,
Sure.
but it's not my goal.
Mhm.
My goal is to help the parties communicate better with often peeling off the emotional part of it so
Mhm.
that they can think clearly
Mhm.
and make the best decisions for them.
Yes.
I don't get to make the decision. We have a built-in rule that we don't make suggestions, although I heard someone say that mediators are often beneficial manipulators. And I think that's a good description, because sometimes when I'm in a facilitative mediation, I'm very cognitive. Don't make a suggestion. Don't make a suggestion. And occasionally I've slipped, not
Mhm.
often, but you learn ways to, how do I explain it? Suggest a little by having someone think it on their own.
Yes. And that's the beautiful part about it.
Yeah. And that takes practice and skill.
Absolutely.
I'm going to step back a second on the caucus. I just finished a mediation where I was an advocate. Frankly, I thought the mediator was terrible. It was a remote mediation, had a 4 hours. She spent about 3 hours fumbling around with Zoom. She obviously didn't know how to do it correctly. We ended up paying for our share of it. And this was a commercial. Someone owed us money and didn't want to pay. I understand that.
Mhm.
If you owe money, and some of your strategy is put up as many blocks as possible. But mediation is essentially, under those circumstances, a negotiation
Mhm.
between the parties. I had no need to convince the mediator of the righteousness of my client's case. No need whatsoever, but she was interested in the facts. And it's okay to know the facts so that you can understand the party's position and their interest.
Yes.
But she was so focused on that, and she started it out as a shuttle mediation. This was not a highly charged emotional case. This was, let's try to get it resolved, have my client get as much money as possible at the lowest cost possible. And their intent was to pay as little as possible at the lowest cost possible. So there was some mutuality there, but I did not have the opportunity to speak directly with the other party or their counsel. She started it out that way. And for me, a shuttle mediation, if you're going to start it out that way, there are a couple of reasons for it, where it's very highly emotional charged and you need to keep the parties separated to avoid things getting even worse.
Sure.
So in my opinion, she handled it incorrectly. My only reservation is to what extent I should have insisted, because there was a point that I wanted to get across. Because the history of this defendant was to put up as many roadblocks, make the expenses high as possible, let it go to judgment, and then good luck collecting.
Strategy.
And so that was the strategy. We had a record of him doing that on numerous occasions. So I wanted to get across to that party and their attorney that they had the unfortunate circumstance of having an attorney who has got nearly 50 years of not just getting judgments, but collecting. I earned the name Junkyard Dog. Now, granted, this was a small value case compared to the ones that I've handled as an attorney in the millions of dollars. But I just wanted them to know that if that's part of your strategy, I want you to know that I'm going to follow you to the ends of the earth, because my client has spent so much money. You've now pushed this into my comfort zone, and I never got the opportunity to do that. And I should have. I regret that I didn't insist upon it. But in order to handle it differently, you really need both parties to agree to handle it differently. Maybe I should have insisted.
Did it resolve?
Yes,
Okay.
it resolved, but it had nothing to do with the media. We got done with the mediation. There was an offer, and the defendant said, let me think about it. So we didn't have a signed agreement. We didn't reschedule the mediation, but between my co-counsel, who was out of Colorado, and I, an opposing counsel, we then negotiated and came up with something that I had to convince my client was the smart thing to do. And it didn't make sense to spend a bunch more money chasing after this. But yeah, it resolved, but no thanks to the mediator.
And that's a perfect example of the surgeon that I mentioned. You can do it. You can get through it and call it a mediation, but is it the best outcome? And that's the shadow mediation. I cannot tell you the last time I did a shuttle mediation in over 17 years, because in my humble opinion, it is almost the worst way to conduct a mediation. And even highly charged, I do protection orders, I do family stuff, very highly charged, and giving folks that opportunity to have those conversations in person, because you're using all your language, your body language, your facial expression, everything is part of that conversation. And in my experience, and allowing folks to experience that is best. And even more than that, if you start out in person and it gets too heated, you can always move to shuttle. But starting at a shuttle first, that to me is not to the best interest of the parties. Sometimes in my experience, I've seen that the problem is that the mediator is not comfortable. The parties probably can handle it just fine, but it's a mediator's personal situation, and they're deflecting that onto the parties.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily the easiest thing to rephrase, which is something that you really got me to focus on. But when you're doing shuttle, I was conveying messages that I wanted her to get across to the other party, and I'm not at all convinced that she did it. As a matter of fact, when I explained things to her that I thought was abundantly clear, she was having a great deal of difficulty, and she had a great deal of difficulty with the facts. And I spent a lot of time over the weekend making sure I had the facts in my head and where I could just spit it out, which is part of my training.
I want to go back to something that you said earlier.
Please, go ahead.
I wanted to address buy the book. And I know that was not said as a negative thing.
No, not at all.
And I appreciate that. I just want to say that I am flexible with what's going on, and my buy the book method is high level. I can come down to more granular, and my style is to treat every single mediation as a new mediation. So I don't put everybody in this soup, but as far as the processes, I just want to make it clear that there is flexibility even when you're going by the book.
You absolutely, I think a really good mediator
Thank you.
can pivot. And I didn't mean to imply that you were inflexible. And as a matter of fact, I've seen you be flexible, but you are listening, paying attention, and I could see your brain functioning, trying to determine the best way to deal with it. And that's what I think that you should be doing. I love co-mediating with you because I
Thank
learned
you.
so much. And I've done quite a few mediations now,
Yes.
but I just, you're one of my favorites.
Thank you.
Actually, you may be my favorite, but I don't want you to get a swollen head.
I won't get a swollen head. Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, so we could go on and on forever,
Yes.
but I'd like to keep this within a half hour.
Okay.
So if there's one key takeaway that the audience should pay attention to, what do you think that should be?
I think it should be that mediation is designed to assist the parties to self-determine their own outcome. If you can keep that in mind, it is such a beautiful service to your parties, because when they can say that this is something that I came up with or something that I agreed to with the other party, no one told me what to do or what I should do or what would be best for me. When I can come up with my own, when I can determine my own outcome, if the mediators can just allow people to do that, I think you'll be in a good place.
Absolutely. And I want to make sure that we distinguish between, because through attorneys, they predominantly want an advisory mediation, which I'm more than capable of doing.
Sure.
And I don't mind doing, except that I'd like to make it clear before we start. When I do a pre-mediation conference, I want to make sure that the parties know the process, that they have the option, and that way they can better prepare. I don't like surprises. I don't like walking in and starting out with a shuttle mediation and everybody was thinking that it wasn't. Or I don't want to start any kind of mediation that the parties are thinking it's advisory and I'm not. I like them to have the option. I like to make sure that they understand it. And frankly, the vast majority of attorneys that I've dealt with really don't understand mediation, advisory mediation, facilitative mediation, and the difference between arbitration.
Wow. Yeah.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
And this goes back partly to my perspective from nearly 50 years ago in mediation, where I avoided it like the plague in the courts because I thought it was a waste of time. But when you say people have become looser, my perspective is that it has become much more of a science.
Okay.
It's much more of a science, and it's much more sophisticated. And I think it's much more helpful. And perhaps that's my perspective because I'm now a mediator in Ireland. But I had been working towards that for the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So one final thing, if I might. I want to mention the Clark County Neighborhood Justice Center where I volunteer.
Yes.
And Patty works there.
I work.
I volunteer
Lawyer.
there. It is part of the Clark County Justice System.
Las
Of
Vegas
course,
Justice Courts.
yeah, it's part of
Yes.
the justice courts, but it doesn't have to come from the courts.
Right.
The beauty of this service is that it's free. It's absolutely free. It does have some
No cost.
limitations,
Mhm.
but for the most part, you could come in off the street. It could be a dog bite issue. It could be dogs barking. It could be a neighbor issue.
Yes.
It could be where a deposit was made on the sale of a home. It could be a lease issue. It could be any issue where
Yeah.
you can't resolve it. Call them up and they'll take care of it. And I've had instances where I get referrals from the outside
Mhm.
and I determine that the Justice Center can handle it.
Yes.
So I refer them to the Justice Center saying, why pay me?
Mm.
Do it for free. Not only that, you may be unfortunate enough to get me as one of the volunteer co-mediators.
Fortunately enough.
Yeah. If you're in Las Vegas, Clark County,
Yes.
take advantage of it.
Yes.
Really.
It
Take
is.
advantage of it.
The Clark County Neighborhood Justice Center, we are part of Las Vegas Justice Court. We are located at 330 South 3rd Street on the 6th floor, and it is a no-cost service. You do not have to be in the court system to access our services, and we mediate everything except contested child custody, which is handled by our sister organization through Clark County District Court, which is the Family Mediation Service. So you can call us up. Our number is 708-98, or you can contact us through the Las Vegas Justice Court website. Click on the tab. I believe it says Mediation Services, and you can fill out a form there and submit it. Or you can walk into our offices, or you can contact us through email through mediation.works@clarkcountynb.gov. So, yeah, a plug for the Neighborhood Justice Center for sure.
Absolutely. I'm very appreciative.
I usually
volunteer.
say that the Neighborhood Justice Center is the best kept secret in town because
I-
we've been around for a long time and nobody
I
knows
think
about
so.
us.
And if I can help promote it, I will.
Yeah,
So I think that kind of wraps it up. I'd like to thank you. We've been trying to
Absolutely.
do this
yes.
for a while, and I'd like to do more with you as part of
Absolutely.
this series.
I would love that.
So with that being said, it's a wrap.
It's a wrap.